Hello, this is Father Louis Scurti back with Michael Debenedetto III, practicing attorney, New York, New Jersey, and I've known Michael for many years. And Michael, thank you very much for
Thank you,
having
Pablo.
me again.
Appreciate it.
There are so many aspects of the law and the church that I want to talk about. I want to address, but I'm not going to be in charge of them because it's ask a bunch of questions. So first of all, let me start with after our first initial interview was very informative. You spoke about a group that we're going to eventually talk about, the Alliance Defending Freedom group. We'll get to that next session. But right now, what issues should Catholics be concerned about regarding their role as United States citizens in our country?
I think something that they should think is the top of the list is the concept of how do we defend and articulate and not be afraid of being pro-life. I think that's a huge thing going on right now in the country. I mean,
So your interest in pro-life has nothing to do with what you're hired to do in your law firm.
no,
Okay.
they're completely separate things.
Yeah, okay.
I don't address any type of religious freedom, pro-life issues in my day-to-day job.
Right. Okay.
This is just a separate.
So this is
interest.
good. So
Yeah.
this is research you've done and you write about in your blog.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
that's
read
good.
about that on my own. Yep.
Yes.
But I think the pro-life issue is very important, because I think there's a lot of misleading going on by leaders. You have politicians that are Catholic and then they go up for communion and they would have committed, public manifestations of saying that abortion is okay, or they're signing a bill that's saying abortion is okay. And that's making it appear to people that, that are Catholics throughout the day to day, oh, okay, that's okay if this person said that, and they're signing bills. It's okay to kind of be a little bit wobbly on that issue.
To fudge. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
to fudge.
Because scandal has always
Yeah,
been
scandal is the
a
word.
very subtle but major issue in our church. It goes back to Jesus talking about, if you scandalize somebody, the little ones he calls them, better you should have a millstone tied around your neck and be thrown in the river. So scandal, which is not an overt sin, but something that you're doing that just sends the wrong message to the public.
Yeah.
And we're concerned right now to the Christian Catholic public.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a concern about that because it's almost saying that you could view Catholicism as a cafeteria, and you're taking a lot of Catholics with you that would, that would have otherwise been influenced to be more pro-life, because you're saying, oh, it's okay, I could vote this way or that way and such. And so it's a very difficult issue. And I think canon law, there are provisions in there about the concept of scandal, like you said, and there's different parts of it. And this is something that I think is important to recognize. You have some bishops that would give communion. You have some bishops that don't give communion. And this is the common criticism I've heard from even some people on one side of the equation, even some priests, for example. They've said, oh, it's not my place to deny somebody Eucharist. And then my response to them is this. I said, it's not you who is, that has that responsibility. You're actually defending the Eucharist. Like, you're defending the Eucharist. You're defending Christ by not allowing his body to be knowingly given to somebody at Mass that has made a public manifestation of supporting these things. And I'm not saying that the person shouldn't be loved. I'm not saying the person shouldn't be shown mercy. You could bless them. They could come up, and instead of giving them communion, you give them a blessing. I know priests, can do that. It isn't within their power. If they do the typical, put the arms on the chest, and, bless the forehead. I mean, that could be a valid middle ground. So I think it's the wrong question for saying it's not my place. None of this is mine. None of this is me. None of this is self. This is our call to defend Christ,
Yeah, and I think maybe some of us as priests take too much egocentric, Christocentric theology upon ourselves. We're not Christ. We're Alter Christi, okay? We're commissioned and ordained and consecrated to do Christ's work. And giving the Eucharist, it's not a political thing, taking the Eucharist and giving it to someone. It's I'm an instrument. So I'm doing what Christ has asked us to do. And the I have to say the hierarchy of the church is in such a way that we are under a bishop. Every diocese is under a bishop, and the church is under a bishop, Bishop of Rome. And we sort of take our, we don't sort of take, we take our guidance and lead from our bishops, and it causes confusion, as you mentioned. In one diocese, if the bishop says no, and the other diocese said okay, like, come on, guys, get your act together. They're apostolic delegates. They are the successors of the apostles. So you go back to, what would Jesus have said? You guys are representing me as I send you out. Yeah. You're representing me. What are you doing? And, I'm doing it my way. I'm doing it your way. I'm doing it his way. We got to do it Christ's way.
Christ's way. He's number one.
Yeah.
And I think that's my common theme that I try to explain to people that are looking at it from that egocentric way. It's Christ, And so I think a lot of guidance could be had, and hopefully the church continues to evolve in their decision making, putting out more guidance, and maybe making more prevalent the understanding of canon law on these issues. Like, canon law it seems to be pretty strict in the catechism. I mean, you could be driving somebody to an abortion facility, you could be endorsing them. It could be a phone call saying, oh, okay, you could have the abortion. Even if you're not taking them there, you're still part of the process. Like, we can't foster a culture of death. We have to foster a culture of life. So
would that be guilty by association?
Yeah, without doing that.
Legal term.
And I would challenge all politicians. This is on both sides of the aisle. There's always debate to fund Planned Parenthood, not to fund Planned Parenthood, all this stuff. Why don't you just say this? Why don't we actually try to push for funding for crisis pregnancy centers, I'm hearing a lot about defunding, and fine, you want to make that as an argument, but it doesn't always really work because Planned Parenthood is funded anyway in the budget. So why aren't people talking about, why don't we fund these organizations? You want to be for women? Well, let's help women in crisis pregnancy centers. Let's give them earmarked money, that for that the budget is going into each year in Congress. Like, why we should be demanding our politicians ask for something, not always just being super, super negative. They need to also ask for something for good. That's what their duty is. And then naturally, I think the progression will end up working out in our favor because people will realize that.
And these would be all politicians, Catholic and non-Catholic.
Yeah, Catholic and non-Catholic. Right. Put in the budget. I demand earmarked funding for said large crisis pregnancy center. I know they exist. There's plenty in this state, plenty around the country that are doing great work for people. I get mail all the time. Our Knights of Columbus actually donate to these ones every single year. So if we could donate at the Knights of Columbus level on councils, right, why don't we put it in the budget for Congress? I mean, if Planned Parenthood could get money, why don't we get our money too for these people? And
real quick, only because you mentioned Knights of Columbus, and I've had some members of Knights of Columbus on my program. Just tell our audience who the Knights of Columbus is in a nutshell.
Okay, sure. So the Knights of Columbus was founded by Father Michael McGivney in the 1800s, and at that time in Connecticut there was a lot of situations that were happening. There was a lot of disease, a lot of widows, and Father McGivney wanted to be able to support the women, support the families that had lost the husband, the bread maker, the breadwinner, in these families. So he started this fraternal organization of men that would come together to help their communities. And as it has evolved throughout the years, it's become a very prime organization right in the forefront of the pro-life movement, in so many regards, for the community, for helping the poor, a lot of things, but really, really strong pro-life, praying at crisis pregnancy centers, raising money for sonograms at crisis pregnancy centers, having something called the Silver Rose flower, which goes around the country every year before landing in Mexico at Our Lady of Guadalupe to raise awareness for the pro-life cause. We did that at our church a couple years ago, actually. So it's very nice, and my dad is organizing it again for this year. So they do a lot of pro-life things for the community. They donate to pro-life causes, and they really just want to make a better community, respecting Christ's values and Marian virtue. So that's all part of what the mission of Knights is.
And just I want to throw in what else the Knights do, and they're very, very important, is working with countries in which Christianity has been really decimated and suffering, and they go back to rebuild churches and help people who are suffering in persecuted areas of the world. Yeah. So it's a lot of good work, and this is one of the elements. Okay, I want to go back to the politicians and communion. What do you think the Catholic politicians' responsibility should be when it comes time for communion?
I think it depends on the state of grace of them, just as any Catholic. Like if they've knowingly created done any mortal sins. That could be anything. That could be getting drunk. That could be extramarital affairs. That could be anything. It could be signing laws supporting abortion. Like if that's the case, and you're not in communion with the church on that issue for however extended time, you didn't go to confession, and you didn't plan to stop doing that, then when you go up for communion, I'll quote, you should respect that you're not following the tenets, but at least respect that you're still in God's presence. So go up for a blessing. That's kind of how I would put it.
Okay, that's good because interesting. The question I asked was really applicable to every Christian, every Catholic. Okay, very traditional, very simple. Our faith indicates that in order for us to receive the Eucharist, which is Holy Communion at a Sunday Mass or any weekday Mass, we should be in a state of grace. Again, everything Michael just explained would indicate a person is or is not in a state of grace. Now, when it's a private sin, nobody knows about it. Okay, that's between you and God, but you still should be in a state of grace. But the real problem we're having now is the public sins. See, the millstone around the neck, scandalous sins. Yeah. When a major legal figure signs a bill promoting abortion, and the rest of the Catholics say that's a scandal. So he or she is scandalizing the and that's a real. My recommendation for them would be to stay in your seat, don't make a big scene about it, and deal with that with your own conscience and your own priest. But
yeah,
that's only mine.
Yeah, no, I definitely understand that. But I mean, I think the importance too is, I think part of the teaching is also they have to speak with their parish priest. They have to speak with the cardinals, things like
Excellent.
that. I did hear one story that was interesting. So when Andrew Cuomo some years ago had signed that really radical New York abortion bill, which actually New Jersey just about almost mirrored this past year, people did tell me that he doesn't actually go up for communion anymore when he does go to the service. So I did hear that. I mean, I wasn't actually present for any mass that he's been at, but I have heard that he doesn't actually go up if he is at a mass. So, I mean, I guess he recognizes that, he has a different view on that issue.
Well, and I respect him for that because he's not scandalizing the community. And I want to say it's nobody else's business that he stays in his pew. But it becomes our business when we see him up there because he's a public figure. He's not just, Joe Schmo around the corner.
Everybody's looking at that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I think that's the big issue. And I think, also politicians and just as anybody should really do a deep soul search. They shouldn't be so consumed with worldly interest, because this also goes back to power.
Shouldn't be consumed
with worldly interest, because this goes back to power and worldly interest, egocentrism. You have to think to yourself, look at the sonogram, look at the pictures, the teaching, that there's cells there that become humans. Like once the point of the sperm and egg came together, the soul is there, so it continues on, and then you could see images of it, you could see all those types of things, and so that's just a biological and faithful understanding of the issue. And I think some people go against their values that they may sympathize with or could have been taught because they just want the donations, they want to stay in power, they care about a legacy. I mean, and yesterday, for example, was the feast of St. Thomas More and St. John Fisher. I actually am wearing a St. Thomas More medallion that my parents got me at my college graduation. And, it's inspiring. St. Thomas More was inspiring for my faith journey. And just think what he did. He was willing to go against
and let that, for this section, that's a great way to close this section. Tell our audience what you remember about Thomas More.
Okay, so Thomas More, he had a very high position in the English government, worked directly under Henry VIII, was his first-hand man. And Henry VIII had wanted to get another divorce to one of the queens or whatnot.
One of his eight
queens, because he wanted a male heir, and so he wanted Thomas More to sign off on that, and he wanted the Pope to be okay with that, and Thomas More said, "No, I'm not going to sign off on it," and the Pope also would not allow that to happen because that's a violation of Catholic teaching. It still is to this day. So he ended up being martyred because he wouldn't do that. He was martyred for his faith. He was beheaded in the Tower, and so we remember his feast day yesterday.
You remember his legacy, his last words before he died that are attributed to him, the king's servant, but
the king's servant, but
God's first.
Yeah, so that's a beautiful remembrance of him. He was such he's definitely one of our greatest saints. And there's also another interesting concept of Thomas More that I learned from actually one of my professors in college when I invited him to speak for a law school event. Actually, he was a really good theology professor. In his presentation, he talked about the relationship between Thomas More and St. John the Baptist. The concept of beheading. They lost their head for the sake of family values and marriage. So it was very interesting how my professor brought that out, and I really have always pondered that point since he brought it up to us in our event that we hosted him for. And St. John the Baptist's birthday is shortly after St. Thomas More's feast day, so it's just an interesting type of way to recognize those two martyrs, So I just want people to recognize that.
And you tied into family values. That's very good, because John was protesting Herod's marrying his brother's wife, and of course John protested that and lost his head. Because of Salome's dance, that's another story.
But it was all connected to that.
Family values.
Family values, and they lose their head for it. So I mean, it's
that's interesting.
It's something to think about. These saints are connected in a way. And Thomas More, I've always had such a devotion to him. When I was growing up, the church that my grandparents would take us to for daily Saturday mass, when we slept over there on weekends, it would be St. Thomas More Church in Fairfield, New Jersey. So I grew up respecting Thomas More, and then in college at St. John's, our church on campus is St. Thomas More, and my bar prep and my whole college and law career there, I always would pray at St. Thomas More Church in the statue.
Thank you.
He's a beautiful saint, so I definitely shout out to him, and I suggest anybody reads more about him and
Thomas More, a man for all seasons.
Yes, and watch the movie too.
This has been Father Louis Scurti with another episode with Michael Debenedetto III, and we're sharing a Catholic's perspective of legal issues related to the church, society, and individuality, and our practicing of our faith. God bless you, and join us for the next episode. And let me hear from you, fatherlouiscurti@hotmail.com, and we'll put Michael's email and the groups he's associated with on the byline as we pass. God bless you.